Can start out. Hi, everybody. Jennifer Pusateri. Delighted to be here this morning. I am Senior Universal Design Consultant for CELT. So I work with programs that typically have to do with students with disabilities, but also other inclusive teaching practices that work for students without disabilities as well.
My name's Madeline Alicio Miller. My background is in public health, but I'm so happy to be one of the faculty instructional consultants here at CELT.
Hi, everyone. I'm Laura Carter-Stone, and I am also a faculty instructional consultant, joined CELT in May, and my background is in teaching and learning. And I care a lot about this topic, in part because I personally have had to transition to being not quite a devotee of group work, but have become increasingly convinced that it is something that is worthy of at least attempting to engage our students in. So happy to think with you all.
So we'll start out with this reflection question. So I want you all to think for just a moment about yourself as a student. And if that's too far back for some of you like myself, you can think about when you've been anywhere that you have had to do group work, maybe in a project for your job, maybe in something you've done outside of your job, like in a community or something. What is it that you dislike about group work, and what is it that you like about group work? So add your thoughts into the chat box if you have that available, and we'll see what folks come up with. What are the things you like about group work, rather, and what are the things you dislike about group work? Okay, so we've got some people like things like making friends. That's always a good thing. But maybe disliking having to figure out who does which job. Some group members don't contribute enough. That's definitely a thing. Florence doesn't like it when someone dominates the whole group or the whole conversation. Sarah likes collaboration and relationship building, but not the conflict piece, which I get. Someone who's not pulling their weight, disliking when people don't participate or talk. And yeah, an abundance of ideas, which is kind of nice. It kind of group work does, in fact, breed those new ideas and that discussion together. But sometimes it's tricky when people are not as interested in the thing as you are. And again, it might feel like you're pulling other people's weight along with you. Yeah, people being more or less prepared for the group activity. Distribution of work not being even. Yeah, these are great. Keep adding those in there. So many of the things that you all put in the chat are things we were thinking about as well. So here, some of the pieces that you mentioned are pieces we're going to touch on today, because those are pretty common. Those are issues that are pretty common. And we've got some ideas and strategies that will help you to move forward with that.
So I hope that you all will hold on to some of the benefits of group work that you all are highlighting in the chat. I'm noticing quite a few people have mentioned enjoying the social element of group work. Some folks have said that it is fun, and have highlighted some of the importance of hearing varied points of view. So all of these things are potential selling points or arguments that you might gently make to your students to try to get them to understand the purpose of group work, which we're going to suggest is important. So something that we'll talk about a little bit later on is that it is going to be important to share why a particular project needs to be a group project, but even broadening beyond the immediate context of your class, it can be helpful to have a conversation with your students or to do some sort of introductory activity where you're highlighting some different long-ranging benefits of group work. So I'm going to share 4 different angles that you might use to try to invest your students to invest in the group work process. So I've shared some sample language that you might be able to copy and paste, potentially to put into assignment description, zhuzh it up so that it fits your context. But you might highlight the benefits, as one of you mentioned, of being able to collaborate effectively in a team as a career-ready skill. And to make it a little bit more immediately meaningful for your students, if you have folks who are going to be looking for jobs in the near future, you might even share that or invite them to cite a recent example of collaboration in your classroom in a job interview or in their application materials to be able to narrate how they effectively contributed to a team, because that is a pretty common interview question and something that employers look for. So that is one angle that you might try, is inviting them to think about how collaboration might be an essential part of their future professional lives. And next up, some folks, particularly if you're teaching academically motivated students or graduate students, it can be helpful to share that collaboration is indeed an important part of the authentic work in many disciplines. Some students may have gotten to the point where they are in their scholarly careers by being really individually driven and independently motivated to engage in academic or scholarly work. But if you have, say, an inspiring example of collaborative scholarly work that would be meaningful to your students, it can be helpful to share that with them as well, and to sort of move them away from some naive understanding of research and scholarship as necessarily an independent endeavor. If you think that your students might be interested in a more personal angle, you might share that collaboration is an essential part of being in relationship to others in your family. You might share a personal anecdote or not about a way that you needed to learn how to distribute labor fairly and in a way that kept folks reasonably happy in a marriage or other partnership. A recent example that comes to mind for me is all of the ways that having a clear spreadsheet and delegation of labor on an international trip with friends potentially saves some friendships. So you might need to think about what will be personally meaningful to students, and then remind them that collaboration is not just necessary for academic or professional success, but also to have meaningful and healthy relationships as well. And the fourth angle, and again, it's important here, as always, to read your students and to try to get some grasp of what's going to be important to them. But while you might not be able to convince your students that group work will save the world, or that your particular group project is going to be able to usher in widespread change, you might remind them that collaboration is an essential component of making changes in a community or contributing meaningfully to a social or political cause. And some of the more powerful conversations that you will have with students is if you're able to pull out specific hopes, interests, goals that they have, and make connections between your students' desires and the project that you are hoping to invest them in. So we'll share along these slides after this presentation, but in here, we've embedded links to a goals or interests inventory, which is a short survey that you can give to students potentially near the beginning of class, potentially as an introductory activity before you try to introduce group work and sell them on it or get them engaged. And there are a lot of benefits of talking to your students, again, whether through a survey or just informal discussion about their values and the ways that this group project or group assignment or activity might be aligned with their personal values and broader ethical orientations. And then, as some of you all cited, I'll thank you for sharing more resources on the ways that collaboration is an essential part of career competency. As some of you all shared, it can be easier to invest students in group work if they like each other, or if there's some basis for social relationships and having fun, or at least somewhat enjoying the process of working together in the class, which you can seed with some smaller scale, maybe ungraded, low stakes or no stakes opportunity to work together and ideally come to enjoy each other as you move up to the process of introducing a larger group project.
Okay, but I know that our brains are biased sometimes to kind of look for the negative, but I feel like we were pretty quick in the chat, just as quick to point out the positive things, as to point out, some of the things that we disliked or struggled with previously. So we would like to obviously dedicate some time to talking about why can group work go awry, in the hopes that, talking about this might kind of train your eye to be able to prevent it, kind of spot it before it happens. And so we've got a list here that I think pretty well encapsulates a lot of what you all were describing in the chat. When it comes to the ways that group work can go awry, we're looking at social emotional things, but we're also looking at logistical things. Everything from how the students select groups to why they select the group members that they do, or how they end up with those people. Having mismatched expectations about what's needed from them versus, what you as the instructor are actually looking for, what their group members are actually looking for, leading into kind of who's doing what, these unclear group roles, leading to uneven distributions of work. So many of us kind of cited the free rider problem, as it's often known, where people aren't pulling their weight, or some other type of miscommunication is happening. And then, of course, having to navigate those tough situations, not only having to divvy up the labor in advance, and that includes physical tasks like writing the thing, making the slides, whatever it is, but also the planning, kind of the invisible load. But then what happens when, despite our best intentions, conflict arises? How do we navigate that? There's hurt feelings sometimes. Sometimes there's embarrassment. Sometimes there's defensiveness. Again, we've got this group of both social, emotional, and logistical things that we can kind of try to prevent once we know that they're common ways that group work can go awry. And so one of the things that we can't stress enough is this idea of prevention. We want to scaffold and remove potential obstacles, potential barriers up front. You, as the instructor in the course, you have your vision for this assignment. You mostly know, you probably, fully know how you want it to run, what it looks like ideally, what success looks like. However, there's kind of a struggle here. We can't always assume that our students are on that same page. There's a lot of things unique to students, and of course, some timely things too that, present barriers that kind of prevent that. First and foremost, we've got COVID. I am still meeting students that are saying, I didn't do anything like this in high school. I didn't have to do this in high school. I was able to just sit, do things on my own, work as an individual. That's what works for me. We are still meeting students, and I think we will for some time, meeting students where COVID was their norm and their group work skills are a little atrophied or a little bit rusty. You'll also have students coming into your course with a varying amount of skills, abilities, mindsets, and neurological states. We meet neurodivergent students who simply need extra practice, extra assistance. Group work is not perhaps their immediate norm that they're comfortable with. We also meet students of different ages, varying demographics like major and field. And I know I've encountered kind of interesting situations where students, not necessarily that they're relying on stereotypes, but that students have beliefs about who a leader should be in a group, or students have beliefs about who they need to listen to, who should be taking on a certain type of work. Maybe it's an older student, maybe it's a student from a field with high status, or a major with higher status or perceived higher status. But age and actually the demographics of the person can play a role in how work gets divvied up, who takes the lead, and how conflict gets navigated. All of these things together can feed or, kind of exacerbate feelings of insecurity. These can be personal feelings of insecurity, just kind of worried about being a good group member, performing well, but also insecurity with the content. I'm still trying to figure out what I'm doing, and now I have to figure that out in front of and with my fellow students. That can be a scary thing. And that insecurity can be compounded by, these students, many of them, they're still developing, they're still learning how to regulate their emotions, they're still practicing professional and semi-professional behaviors. There's kind of a hidden curriculum to your course, a hidden curriculum to your group assignments, where it's not just about writing the paper, making the presentation, having a nice product for you. It's also making this experience a personally successful one where they're collaborating well, where it's a, you know, kind of socially, emotionally positive experience. So instead of hoping that students just pull all this off and figure it out, we really do need to be proactive, preventative, and intentional in how we put these group projects together and in the types of information and resources that we provide for students.
And so there's a couple of ways that we can really set ourselves up and set our students up for success. And we can do that again by being proactive. So one of the biggest questions I think that's important to ask ourselves before we jump into planning a group activity. I mean, I think we can all understand that there are obvious benefits to learning how to work in a group, but not every assignment or project needs to be a group project. So some of the things we can ask ourselves when we're thinking about including or expanding something into a group project is, why do I want this to be a group project? So yeah, obviously this is an important skill to learn, but is this the right place for that to take place? Something else to think about is, would the group activity or group project that you're planning, would that be the first time that students have collaborated in your class? If so, that can be a little tricky because they have not really built up a rapport with each other, and that can cause some issues as well. Does it absolutely have to be a group project is another question to think about. Or could we still encourage students to work collaboratively and to learn some of those skills by having it be a partner situation? Is that a possibility? Would you still be able to achieve the same means if you were using a partner instead of a group, so instead of a larger group rather? And is this a situation where some students might be able to choose to work alone? That can be useful. We did mention neurodivergent students, but that can be useful for some students, neurodivergent students, and also non-neurodivergent students as well. Having that option to work alone can mean the difference between them actually learning the things and not. So those are questions to ask yourself. And the answer might be, no, this really does need to be a partner activity, or this really does need to be a group project. And that's okay. But we really want to ask ourselves these questions as we're thinking about and planning for a group project. And then something else that we've kind of already mentioned is thinking about, in the field that I'm in, is this something that would be done in a group in like real life, like in real work life, right? Because if this is an activity or a project or whatever that would typically you would do by yourself, I don't know that it makes sense necessarily to have this be a group project. Or perhaps it can be a group in another way. So maybe you can think about and have students get together into a smaller group and brainstorm some ideas, but then be able to work separately. So really thinking about these different pieces, I think, is going to be useful. And I'm going to go back to have you done any other collaborative activities yet in this class? And I want to shout out Dr. Brenna Bird. She does a lot of really interesting things, but one of the things that she does to build that rapport from the very beginning in her class is she has some low stakes, just sort of throwaway icebreaker type questions. And it's not really your typical icebreakers. It's something where we're pretty sure everybody's going to have an opinion. So it might be something like, what is a food texture that you cannot stand? So like, that's a very simple question. And everyone probably is going to have something that they're like, oh my God, I can't even with raw steak or whatever. And you have an opinion, you're able to start building those collaborative skills between you and someone else in the class, but you're not jumping straight into a group project first, right? You're starting with those small, low stakes, no stakes conversations and kind of building up so that when you're ready later in the semester to do a group project, your students have already been in the practice of talking to each other. That's one example. One of the ways that we can also think about setting our students up for success is in the way that we form our groups. So having students self-select groups can be tricky for a lot of reasons. Often students will choose to be in a group with people they already know, with their friends. Sometimes more introverted students get picked last, and they get that feeling that none of us like, which is the being picked last in gym class feeling. That can be tricky. There can also be equity concerns. There is some research that shows that students tend to choose groups that include students who are similar to themselves. And so we can imagine that there could be some serious concerns there when it comes to forming equitable groups. We know that students also choose groups based on who they like rather than who they might work best with. So that's another thing to keep in mind as well. So there are some different ways we can think about setting groups up. If you really, really want students to form the groups, that's fine. They can choose a group based on their preferred topic. So if you're if you're doing a group project where there may be different areas of focus, you can have them submit which areas are the most interesting to them first, and then then you would form the groups from that. You can also consider what days and times they have availability. This works nicely for hybrid or online classes, in addition to in-person classes as well. We know that getting together outside of class can be really difficult, so especially for students who work, who are involved in Greek life, who are involved in sports, etc. So if you can think about forming your groups based on what days they're available. So for example, you might say, we're going to have one group that's going to be available typically on Tuesday evenings. We'll have another group that will be available that's normally available on Wednesday afternoons or whatever, and form your groups that way. So you're already setting them up to have the availability and the time to be able to meet with each other. One other way to do this, and this is a super cheesy name, it's a buddy system. I really like this version because it's a little bit of both worlds. So basically, in a buddy system situation, each student would be able to choose one partner, so someone probably that they know for the most part. They could choose one person they feel comfortable with already, and then you, the instructor, can take two partner groups and form them into a group of 4. So you still have a little control over the situation, and students still have a little bit of control over the situation. That's a nice balance of ways to form groups. You can also do something called skill-based grouping. And I think we touched a little bit on this, but you can consider what are the different roles that we're going to need for this activity or project. So this is just one example of a group that's going to get together and present like a slide presentation or a speech or something. And so in that group, you're going to need people who, you're going to need one person who's going to be the presenter, like the person that's going to stand up and do the talking. You're going to need one person that's going to organize, make sure everybody's got their things done, make sure everything's ready to go. You're going to need someone who's going to do the visual type things. So maybe laying out the slides, putting together handouts, that kind of stuff. And you're going to need one person who's going to be doing some of the more significant writing pieces, putting together the text for the slides, or putting together the actual speech that people are going to say. And so you can have students choose what are their top 2 out of these 4 roles. And so they might choose, let's say, artist and organizer. That might be my 2 top choices. And then you can have them form groups based on those roles. So you can do this yourself as an instructor. You can actually have them like physically in the space go to, if you feel like you're more of a presenter, go stand in this corner. If you feel like you're more of an organizer, go stand in this corner, and do it that way, and then have them form their groups with one person from each of those different areas. So that way, when you get into your groups, you already know your role. You know kind of what you're going to be expected to do, what you're going to take care of. Of course, we can help lay this out as well as instructors by saying the presenter will be responsible for blank, filling in all those blanks for your project. But they already know what they're going to be doing, but also they're entering a group with something they feel confident about themselves already, right? So they're taking that with them into this group, and that's really going to help support folks who are uncomfortable with group work, because they often get put into a group and then someone else takes the thing they're really good at, and they're not able to kind of advocate for themselves in that situation. So this might help to reduce some of those issues.
Okay. Another big piece of these efforts is this idea of a group contract. And we're going to get into this idea of scaffolding a group contract. How are you going to put this together? What might be a good way to add this to your assignment, to your activity? So as we mentioned earlier, you will get a copy of these slides. This is an interactive link. We've got a group contract activity kit folder for you. And when you open it up, when you have a chance to kind of walk through it, you'll see different components. We've, of course, got an overview that you'll use to not only, kind of better understand the activity yourself, but help you explain it to your students, why you're doing the things that you're doing, what they're going to need to be able to create a successful and comprehensive group contract, and some guiding activities, some guiding questions to help them kind of reflect on their role in the group, what their role could be, what their role should be, what they would prefer it to be. So asking about their skills, but then asking about how they handle problems, how they communicate. Um, each student will create these individual reflections themselves, and then the group will come together to finally kind of finalize which rules are going to be the ground rules for the group. Of all the rules that all the group members prefer, think about, submit, what is going to be their top 10? And of course, there's space to modify them, to add additional notes, to add additional ideas. You do want this to be a living, dynamic document for the students. Not that it's always fair game to change all 10 of the rules at any moment. However, this does need to be a living document that they could revisit if there were opportunities for it to better serve their needs. So we've got, yeah. We've got, you might be saying this is a whole big folder. This are all these assignments. These are all these documents. These are all these reflection questions. I've already got my assignments kind of introduced to the students. How the heck am I going to add all of this stuff? And it's week 4. Or how the heck am I going to, add this kind of simply and easily? If you do nothing else, if the folder of resources is maybe a little bit too much, I've kind of distilled this down to just 5 big points or 5 quick notes that you're going to want to keep in mind if you're doing kind of a quick and dirty or a shortened version of a group contract for your students. First and foremost, please be part of your students' process. Just like with the group assignment instructions themselves, you can't just kind of ask students to reflect, ask them what jobs they want to do, ask them to set up ground rules, and then be like, yeah, okay, it's good. You will want to nudge them in terms of how are you going to communicate with each other? How much communication? What will you do if you all disagree? When is appropriate to get the instructor involved in a disagreement? And we would really encourage you to scaffold that contract into the larger assignment. I'm not saying, put teeth into it, but I am saying emphasize its merit, emphasize its value, make it part of the assignment so that students know they need to take it seriously and that it's going to be helpful for them and it's going to actually help them successfully complete the assignment. When you're asking students to actually complete the contract, do that reflection, you can kind of distill down what you're asking them to think about into roles and responsibilities and how they're going to communicate with each other. At a bare minimum, who's going to be doing what, when and why, and how are they going to communicate with each other? Is it WhatsApp? Is it texting? Is it emails? Where is the centralized bank of email addresses? If nothing else makes it into their group contract, it's got to be roles and responsibilities and communication. And then finally, one thing I like to do is, even as I've had, my students working largely independently on their group projects, when they have check-ins with me, I do reserve time and I do take time to say, how's your group work going? Have we had any disagreements? This is a safe space for us to share, what we're working on, questions that we have, things that we haven't quite been able to resolve yet. And that does take a little bit of work on the front end to kind of build that rapport with students and make sure that they feel safe enough to trust you with things or trust you with questions and rapport and kind of speak out about that. But it is important to ask about how their group work is going, check in on those interpersonal processes. Jennifer, could I ask you to pause sharing for just a little bit so I can show an example? Okay. Okay. And so I want to shout out Dr. Sarah Wackerbarth, who I think is on this meeting. When I was first starting out teaching, offering group projects, Sarah shared this kind of public health oriented team contract with me. It's much shorter. It's definitely simplified in terms of all the reflection that we ask students to do when you compare it to that folder, that kit of resources. But this is something where if you're trying to kind of accomplish group work and build that contract quickly, this is a reasonable modified version that we're also happy to share and that you can kind of modify as your needs dictate.
All right, and if we're able to go back to the slides real quick, if you were done showing that example, Madeline, thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
So to summarize and synthesize, the most important parts of what we've shared, or at least the key pieces, we talked a bit about trying to make connections between your students' personal, if possible, individual goals, whether that's professional, academic, community-oriented goals, or personal goals, to try to invest them in engaging in group work, even when it gets tricky or complicated. And then we've talked about scaffolding up to being able to work together in a group, whether that's through some low stakes or no stakes opportunities to work together. I love the food texture exercise, Jennifer, and have many thoughts and feelings that I would love to share. We've talked about forming groups intentionally, and that can mean thinking through the logistics of which students will be able to coordinate more easily based on schedules or location, or Jennifer shared what I think is a powerful practice of thinking about skills-based grouping, which will allow students to leverage their strengths. And then overall, we talked about drilling into the explicit processes of collaborating and sharing with students what you hope to see. Much like in many realms of life, it can be helpful to anticipate difficulty, anticipate, like Madeline shared in that group contract activity, that things may go wrong, or there will be bumps or hiccups along the way, whether that is based on interpersonal conflicts or just life conflicts. And so it can be helpful to think in a forward-thinking way about ways that you might invite students to address those and work together to succeed in spite of those challenges. And then finally, don't leave your students alone with this. We encourage you all to take an active role in checking in with them, talking with them as they are in the thick of the process of working through some of the challenges, but also opportunities that come from collaborating. So at this point, that is the bulk of the content that we have to share, and we would like to hear from you all about any remaining questions, any lingering concerns, any excitements that you'd like to chat about with this group.
And for your privacy